All right, we've got a lot of content this week and our usual amount of time, so I'm going to be a little more rigorous about managing the time, if that's okay. I'd like to welcome everybody to Ask Sympraxis. This one is fun because it's your questions. It's your mailbag. It was direct, specific questions that you sent. So we'd love to jump into them. We definitely have more questions than we will have time to answer here, but as usual, we'll keep the dialogue going in the chat. I'm sure, and I think we have answers, and they're usually good answers as Sympraxians, but we don't have all the answers. And you have your own lived experience, and I know there's some expertise on this call too. So feel free to chime in where you have something to contribute. Most of you know our team already and the roles. Build work, yeah, the build works right here. So we bring these questions. We actually approach them from a variety of different angles because of what we specialize in and what we do. So our agenda today, pretty simple. Your questions, our answers, and probably some dad jokes from Todd from time to time, usually at the most inappropriate point in the conversation. So
yeah, if I can remove any momentum anybody's got, that's normally where I
keep doing it, Todd. Yeah, that's it.
Stick with what works.
So let's start big and broad, right? Recommendations and guidelines that you're putting together a team of people to support SharePoint and Microsoft 365. What guidelines do we offer? What organizational roles are ideal? What are some of the best practices that we've seen out there in the world? Should I just flip? I'll just flip it forward because there's a wall of text on this slide. But Emily, I suspect that you thought through some of this and jotted it down. Do you want to take the lead on this one?
Yes, these are two snippets from the article at the bottom, Planning Intranet Governance, which I strongly recommend a read for the person who asked this question. There's a lot of good framework in there and questions to help guide you through the process of seeing who should be involved on your intranet. Before joining Sympraxis, I was a platform owner at a quickly growing company where we started with 150 people and we moved to 1,500. So I'd say one of the factors of your size of team is definitely going to be related to how many people you're supporting. It's definitely going to be related to the complexity of your environment as well. I know the platform that I was working with was all out of the box. So for example, I didn't have any developers on staff. That's actually something I worked with Sympraxis when we had those one-off development needs. One thing I'd recommend for all organizations is definitely to have a steering committee and making sure that it's diverse across your organization. It's not just IT and a communications or marketing team, but you're making sure you have all of the different stakeholders involved. What the organization I was at a biotech, so it was really important that we had the science side of the business involved, not just the sales, general, and admin, because they had very different needs than the SG&A group.
Anything else? Anything from the devs on this one, Mark? Yeah.
Now, I've always had a slightly different answer that's less detailed than this. Emily's always more detailed than I am. I think that you have to think about having some sort of consultative capability usually within the IT organization, but it doesn't have to be, where people can go and get help with this stuff. So that to me is the number one success factor in organizations that I've seen use the platform well versus not well. And we can talk about the maturity model in endless detail and break it down into lots more detail. But I think if you view it as deploy it and now we're done, especially from an IT perspective, you're eventually going to fail. So it's a role internally of a consultative group, and I say group because it's often more than one person. And it doesn't mean it's their full-time job, but they have to be there to help people. I want to create a list that does something. How do I do that? That's not a project. That's a little bit of consultation. So I think that role is really important.
And Mark, is that more often from the technology out into the business or from the business into the technology? Like people living in the business unit who it's our job maybe as a core technology team to enable them to ask good questions, to prototype, to play, to learn, to stay abreast of what's new.
Yeah, I mean, it can take
multiple ways to solve that, right?
Yeah. Sure. I mean, it can be a train the trainer, or teach the teacher, or whatever. There are a lot of different ways to do it, but there have to be people who have that role and know that they have that role, so that they're available when people need help.
Yeah, and I want to.
the budget ploy that I see all the time is we can talk to you about building that list, but what's your budget code? And it's like, I'm not going to ask you because you're just going to be pushing me on for money. And that's a very crappy user experience, right? You want to just service those people, help them understand how to do things better. Sorry, Todd.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I want to put a specific plug for the whole champions idea, and Caleb said something in the chat about it. A long time ago when SharePoint was still steam powered and I was an internal SharePoint folk running a thing, my boss made me set up like a once a month or twice a month meeting of non-IT folks, so non-nerds in the company, and have them all get together and talk about how they'd been using the platform that I had to run. And the guy knew me pretty well. He's like, you need to set this meeting up, you need to chair it and invite people, but you can't talk. So you start the meeting and you have somebody else talk and you can't talk.
So in other words, that didn't work out.
It was excruciating. It's horrible. But it provided two great things because like we've kind of touched around this, I'm a terrible SharePoint user. And so those folks were actually using the product and teaching me things, but teaching each other things. So like the list thing would be interesting because if someone in accounting was doing a thing with lists, then somebody in HR would be, oh, that's awesome. We could do that. So it was really great for that. The other thing that was really great for was every time we did something to the platform, upgrades or whatever, we would bring them in early, have them kind of look at it, show them what we're going to do, get their feedback on it. And then when we rolled it out and everything went to hell, as it always does, we had little pockets of support in each of these groups, and we had little people that were kind of helping us out because they understood the rest of the story. So that was a really beneficial thing. So, and the other thing, the internal consultancy, I like that. I think keeping in mind that as IT, my job is to make other people's job easy. I think there's a Venn diagram, and that's how we handle, customer things. They talk to us about what they do for, their job. We talk to them about the platform, and then the solution is somewhere in the middle. And I think that's the same idea internally.
That statement that you made that IT's job is to make other people's job easy. If every IT department in the world believed that, then there wouldn't be any negativity. But it's really unusual, right? That mindset is that consultative mindset. Have we beaten this one to death
yet?
Yeah,
the softball.
You just want me to keep talking?
Softball's over. The softball's over. The next one goes a little deeper. I want to caveat this one because I think you might talk about it in the next Ask Sympraxis in a bit more depth. So, Mark, do you want to speak to this one? I know you dream at night of content types in SharePoint, so you might want to lead us on.
Yeah, I know, and those are good dreams. They are not nightmares. So this one was a question that came in, and I didn't understand exactly what the problem was. I mean, when you define a content type at the site level, any changes that you make ought to push down to the places that you've used it. Now, there was an exception when they first rolled out the modern content type gallery. The box that used to automatically be checked that said update all of the content types that depend on this content type, it used to be so when they first rolled out the modern UI, that was unchecked by default, which did not match the old behavior. So now it is checked by default. So depending on when this happened, it might have been during that window where that box was unchecked by default. And if you didn't scroll down, you wouldn't see it. That's the only thing I can think of about, what this is.
The only other thing I could add maybe is that at one point it was linked to the site column, and then because of like deleting and re-adding and whatever, it could have the same name but actually not be linked anymore. And so you need to like go into the libraries and look at the site column and make sure it still has a parent site column that is in the site columns that's in the content type, and that they're all that you can trace it all back.
That's an excellent point. Sometimes we end up like if you create a site column called foo, and then in the list you create a column called foo. The one in the list will actually be called foo1. It'll have a little 1 after it. So
internally, yes. The internal name.
internally.
Yep.
So you need to look at what the internal name is for the columns that you think are coming from the content type and make sure that they actually match. You can get, especially when you're prototyping and you're doing adding and subtracting, like Julie said, you can get out of sync a little bit. So that's an excellent tip to check that.
Can we plant the seed for the use this as a bit of a tease for our next Ask Sympraxis, completely focused on content types with the three of us who aren't going to Vegas. So Julie, Mark, and Todd. So you've got content type, information architect, a developer's point of view, and Todd talking about automation of content type things with PowerShell. So
yeah, you're all gonna miss it, and that'll be okay. It's gonna be so
Everyone
good.
who's in Vegas is going to miss it, and I think
we'll be in Vegas.
There will be weeping.
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
Okay, let's carry on. This is about rolling up tasks into one site. The best approach using search, using HCWP. Emily, I think you probably put together this answer. Do you want to lead us on this one?
Yeah, with help from Derek, because he's the one that helped edit the template. But essentially what we did is we had a use case with a client where they had SharePoint lists across different site collections, and we wanted to roll up into one place. So we used the modern PNP search web part, and then we actually edited that template. So if you go to the next slide, we have a redacted version where you can see the filters on the left side helping you refine your tasks. But then we did include that task date field, and we changed the hyperlink to the item. So that title field, when you click on it, opens up the card and you can see all of the information of that task.
So I think that question was a little general because it made it sound like there were tasks in different spots. I want to sort of give this an asterisk. This is based on tasks that are all the same. So they are of all the same content type. You could potentially start pulling other things. You could start pulling in other things, but you would probably need to use the graph or you do something to get a result source that would actually cull everything together. But then what we did was we used the PNP search web part. I think we've done 1 or 2 sections on the PNP search web part in Sympraxis before, but then we customized the template here. Emily, did I actually write like a custom template, or did we just configure it properly to have different
columns?
Yeah, I think we just customized it a little bit. Like
we did just customize it a little bit, yes.
Yeah, we didn't like go full on and build a custom. We didn't build a custom like handlebars template, but we just sort of swapped out which fields it was calling and what URLs it was calling.
Russell wants to know.
Yeah, Russell's question is really important. Any modern list template that doesn't use a content type, don't use it. Because you're just going to paint yourself in a corner, right? Content types are at the base of so many of the benefits here. I haven't used that list template because I tend to build things from scratch because I just don't need that template boost. So if you're going to use those templates, make sure that they use a content type that actually means something. There are a couple of weird content type names in some of those list templates that don't necessarily serve the purpose that you thought.
Yeah, I can't wait till they let us roll out our own templates and then I can get rid of all the Microsoft ones and say, hey, use ours instead. I can't believe that they did that. I mean, that's going against everything they ever told us.
We've had discussions behind some closed doors about
Mark
that.
Has ranted about this recently? Yes, he has.
And we can't turn these off. Is that correct?
Not today.
Jeez. Thank you.
There was a previous question from Sean. I wanted to make sure, did we tackle that? It was related to the previous piece
I didn't see.
Content
I
types.
must have missed it.
Put an update of the field at the list level impactability for site setting column updates.
It shouldn't unless you've removed the column at the list level, which you can do, because that can sort of disconnect you from the content type. But generally that wouldn't happen.
Cool. Thank you. Let's stay on tasks. And Emily, I think this is near and dear to your heart. You've presented on this at user group meetings and SharePoint Saturdays and the like in the past. Want to speak to this one a bit?
Yes. So the base of the question is Planner going away? The answer is no. And what Microsoft did was they didn't replace the Planner app. What they did was they added this Tasks app in Microsoft Teams, which rolls up your to-do tasks and your Planner tasks. So you can see your group work items and your individual work items at the same time. So for the other part of the question of, like what should we be using for team collaboration? I think this is an it depends. So we've divided them kind of out between individual team and enterprise task management. And you can see in team, we have Planner, Excel, and SharePoint lists. Previously, I felt really strongly about Planner being an excellent option, but now that SharePoint lists have come out with board view, you just have a lot more customization options there. So that's a pretty strong contender depending on which fields you need and what kind of intricacies you need to track those tasks.
Not to jump back to the content types, but two as well, if you are deploying team sites and you're provisioning content types from the hub and you have a task content type, then you can also use the PnP search web parts to roll those back up again. So, SharePoint for the win.
Emily, I was trying to hover on this slide for tooltips on those two enterprise icons that are not Microsoft Project. Tell us what those are.
Dynamics 365 and I think Azure DevOps.
Azure DevOps. Okay, for managing dev-centric tasks, etc.
Yep.
Got it. Awesome. And there was one more, a bit more detail about that task ecosystem. Yes?
Yeah, this is just a good one to screenshot and keep when you're trying to make some plans to show what integrations there are across the different ones. So, for example, I'm a huge OneNote user. I really loved those to-do tags in OneNote, but they are integrated with nothing. They just exist in OneNote. So if I want to have to-do tasks coming from my OneNote to show up in my Outlook and maybe to-do, which means it'll also show up in that tasks by Planner and to-do app in Teams, then I will actually want to use those Outlook tasks in OneNote. So depending where you're working and where you want it to show up, this is a great chart to keep an eye on.
Should we do our typical and usual disclaimer regarding programmatic access to Planner on this slide?
Oh, Jesus, I'm not getting myself into that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's why to be honest, that's why I'm actually kind of thinking back towards using SharePoint lists again because of the programmatic inabilities of my ability to access the Planner API other than as a user in the group. So it's just a non-starter when you're talking about automation, where I can create a content type, use site columns, create those lists in every team. I can automate that through application permissions so that we can talk about a provisioning scenario. And then further, we can roll those things up like we were just talking about with the PnP web parts and or other ways. So even though it's an extensibility thing, it's not a really hard extensibility. It's not like you have to do a bunch of coding to get that to happen. There are tools already that you can configure to do that provisioning and do that roll up. Even though they're extensibility tools, they're tools that already exist and they're more configured than coded. So I'm
sorry,
just starting
I just rolled the
feel
soapbox
sad.
out here for you, Julie. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well,
And
stand on this. Okay. All right. Let's talk about teamification a little bit. Is there ever a reason to not create a Microsoft team first and then leverage the team site that comes with it if I'm creating a SharePoint team site?
So the wording here is a little goofy. And I don't mean it in a negative way, but this is Microsoft's wording problem, right? The question is whether you want to create a place to collaborate starting in Teams or a SharePoint team site, right? Am I stating the question correctly? Mike?
Sounds like it. Yeah, it wasn't my question, but sure.
Yeah, but as long as you sign off on that.
Okay. I'm just reading the slides, Mark. Come on.
Yeah. So Matt Wade did a great thing years ago where he came up with this big chart that explained, where you start something has a bit of an impact on what you get. And this diagram is what came out of it. So, essentially what you're doing when you create a Microsoft team or a team site is you're creating a Microsoft 365 group under the covers. but that group gets access to slightly different stuff that's provisioned, right? Different services are provisioned, and that's what this picture tries to get across.
Yeah. So as an admin, this is something that comes up. I get people talking about. One of the pieces of advice that we all give customers is, obviously this is groups in the background is what we're kind of talking about. And so we tell people that the group should be created in whatever place is going to be the main use of that group. And so from the viewer mailbag, it sounds like SharePoint is that place. And so, that's where they should create that stuff. When that happens, then if you just create it, you get that little thing in the corner that says, do you want to, real-time chat? Do you want to create the Teams thing? I kind of think that's part of what they're asking. When you create the group, Microsoft doesn't know in the background whether you're going to do Yammer or Teams. So the reason there's even a question about all of this is because they want to leave the door open for using Yammer. I still don't do the Teams thing all the time because it just creates another thing that I have to keep track of. But that little box will show up for site admins at the bottom, so you can clear that away. But really the thing to understand, and I love this slide. I take this thing out all the time. The real thing with this question is whether you're doing Yammer or Teams. And if you're always going to do Teams, then there's probably not much problem with clicking that box, making it go away.
Also on this slide, that kind of begs the question: do we have use cases, like legitimate use cases, or I'm sure we have strong opinions about private groups?
As an admin, I find the management subpar.
They seem to defeat the whole. Sorry, do you say private groups or private channels?
Private groups.
Sorry, I don't feel as much disdain for those.
Yeah,
I was going to say private groups are fine.
Yeah,
private channels.
Groups are fine. Yes.
Yeah. So private groups are just undiscoverable, whereas public groups are discoverable.
Mm-hmm.
So like if you have a group that's called "We're going to fire everybody," you probably should make that private. That's really the only distinction that I can come up with. I mean, you often have groups that by their very existence telegraph something, and those should be private if you don't want other people to know about it. If you think that you may have people requesting membership of a group based on its existence, then it should be public.
Yeah. Small aside, talking about the title being important, long time ago, I worked at a company and they were getting ready to lay people off. And one of the managers had a severance letter that she was getting ready to print, and she printed it. And we had, servers and print queues, and somebody was having problems printing something and they had the print queue up, and they saw a document come up that said, John Smith's severance package as it went through, and like, oh, and so this was like 2 days before the layoffs. So yes, the title itself can be very important. Keep that quiet too.
One last point on this slide, if I may. I think the main thing is to be consistent, right? So if you're going to be a team-centric organization, create your groups from teams. If you're going to be a SharePoint-centric organization, create your team sites first. There may be exceptions to that, but if you're trying to come up with what's the best way for us to do this, do it the same way every time, and then you won't be confused about, well, which one of these happened first. I think those team-centric organizations absolutely should be creating things from teams.
Russell, do you care to offer a counterpoint? You were the one who said in this chat, "Don't use Teams."
Yeah, I've just gotten so many issues with the security. They want to override the security, and it just gets to be such a bottleneck. And some things invariably break when they want to share with this file with this person, or I forget the details, but it's always led to trouble.
Could I ask Mark, just to push back on the private channel and Teams? I create a project team. I'm the project manager. There's one or two other people who should see just this content. There's 15 people on the team. Why wouldn't I use a private channel for that? Project financials that show things like billing rates and hourly costs.
Yeah, I mean, I know that example actually makes some sense. I think in a lot of cases, though, you're effectively creating another team, right? You're slicing off, you're calving part of the team.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So it might be, for example, that the project manager and the
Sponsor
COO,
or yeah. Yep.
all the project managers and the COOs should be seeing all those budgets across projects. So that's a good team to have.
Project leadership team, right? Okay,
right.
fair.
As opposed to sort of calving off, and then you can accomplish things like, the COO needs access to every team. Well, no, they don't. They really need access to every budget, which ought to be stored centrally. So I think that there are better ways to solve it than creating those private channels, which to me don't make as much sense.
Good.
Well,
No,
and they create
teams,
these containers of things that then don't make sense to be their own container.
Right.
Yeah, the governance headaches, Julie, of the
the governance
site
headaches of it.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. And those are sites that are not shown as sites, correct?
Right.
They're not.
Right.
They're not
and they have their own
No one knows they have a
templates
site.
or-
Right. Yeah.
So you're sort of painting yourself into a known corner, but you have to be willing to handle that.
Right. Yeah, I forgot. Site template equals Teams channel, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, let's keep going. Clicking on other options. This is, I think, at the time of site creation. Clicking on the other options. What are the consequences for permissions? Why would I do it or not do it? So I think we've dropped a couple of images in here. Who wants to take this one? Create a site dialog.
Yeah. So Emily was playing with this a little bit this morning. I guess I'll let her. Yeah.
I think it's a bit of a continuation on our previous discussion, because here's one option to make like a team site, which you might make without a connected Microsoft 365 group. I haven't run into a lot of use cases in the past couple of years where that Microsoft 365 group is not needed. I think that's something that's so usable over other site collections and providing other permissions in other places. We kind of started this call talking about the usability of Microsoft 365 groups as permission groups. So I don't personally have a good example of why I would use one of these other options.
I think it's a classic thing, isn't it? It's just people coming from classic and they're have these scenarios.
There are some really isolated scenarios. For example, we're doing a migration for some folks right now, and they decided they wanted to move everything into a staging site, and then we would move it from the staging site into another tenant. So we have two staging sites, one on each tenant. So we're moving tenant to tenant, and they made both of those non-group connected team sites. Does that make sense? Well, it does, but it's really an exception. So I mean, there are times when you might do it, but I think you look at it as an exception.
I differ from that in my experience, and at least in my environment. I mean, the idea behind the group is everyone gets the same level of access, but all the sites we create, there's differing levels of access, and you want to customize the security. And that's what I constantly run into, and that's why I constantly avoid the use of Teams. Just go right to the SharePoint side using that create a site, but the non-group related site. Is that doesn't happen everywhere else?
I think you're coming at it in a very classic way, though.
You can manage the permissions in a modern team site that has a group behind it in very specific ways. The default way is the group membership, and you have owners and members, but you can also add visitors, and you can go into advanced permission settings and get as specific as you want.
Yeah.
And that doesn't break the whole, because I thought I tried that early on in the Teams rollout, and it broke stuff in Teams when we went and monkeyed with permissions. But maybe I didn't know what I was doing back then, or maybe things have gotten better.
Well,
but I thought if you messed with security, it broke some of the team stuff.
If you delete that members group, you're going to have problems.
Yeah,
that it would.
It won't. So what Mark is suggesting, we've done for customers before, and because we're adding permissions in the SharePoint, permissions thing, it is only for SharePoint, so it doesn't break Teams. But if you give somebody read-only access in SharePoint, they're not going to have any access to Teams. They're not going to have any access to the planner, the Excel, anything like that, because you're adding SharePoint-only permissions. But ever since groups started coming out and we were trying to feel it out, I've done the whole, editing SharePoint permissions thing, and I've never seen it break anything.
All right, I gotta go look at that again then. Thanks.
Thanks, Russell.
But I think
we're getting close.
on this,
Go ahead, Derek. Yep.
I was going to say, I think on this list, the only one of these in my mind that has any value is Team Site versus all the others, which are classic site templates.
Yep.
And those I would not use.
What about communication site? Isn't that in there?
No, that's
on the
other
left.
options. Yeah.
It's a
on the-
sub-
This is a sub dialogue of the team site creation, other
Right.
options, or sorry, the bottom,
Yeah.
the bottom box on the left. Right. We're getting close to the top of the hour. Is there one more question that folks from Sympraxis wanted to make sure we tackled, or do you want to flip right to the resources summary and leave some things to, as Hemingway used to say, write about tomorrow?
Yeah, I just wanted to make one thing. One of the questions that we got in the mailbag was about archiving teams and archiving things. And I did want to mention that when groups and teams and when that stuff first came out, there was no built-in way to archive it. So we kind of had to cobble things together with PowerShell to make sites read-only and all that. But there is now an archive group which archives SharePoint teams and all that inside of the product. So if that's part of your workflow projects, keep stuff around for 7 years, whatever, check that out. Just archive, group, Google that.
There's this is the bottom link on this slide, archive or delete a team in Microsoft Teams.
There you go.
This bit of reference here. So like always, we will make the slides available. I'm going to jump to the end if that's okay. Just make sure we're on point for the next things. Oh, the next things are simply because we put the resources in line, and you'll see them when we publish this deck. You can get to them there. A couple upcoming things, obviously Vegas. 3 of 6 of us, Derek, on the big stage. We're excited. Anything about Seattle to update folks with?
If folks are going to be in Seattle at SP 365 EduCon, formerly SP Fest, Julie and I are presenting a half-day workshop on building your own adaptive card extensions, which is the new Viva Connections extensibility point.
Anybody's going to be in Sweden for CEF? We'll have a significant presence there. Exactly, and Thrive. Should probably put some dates in here next time. A little farther out.
Dates,
So-
figs, whatever.
Next
Some kind
week.
of dried fruit.
Or 2 weeks.
Thrive is 2 weeks?
2 weeks is Vegas,
No,
so I
no.
hope to see
This is
everybody.
Vegas.
In
Right,
2
yeah.
weeks, just wrapping up, in 2 weeks, Mark, Todd, and I will talk Content Type Hub
And content
and
type
related
hub
tech.
/ gallery / all that stuff.
And
Yeah.
related tech. Yes.
All right, I think that is
right.
that is it. Thank you everybody for contributing questions for the dialogue today. It was that was outstanding. We look forward to doing more of these. Keep them coming, and you'll speak to half of us in 2 weeks, and the rest will bring back some nuggets of wisdom from Vegas. Thanks,
Bye, everybody.
everybody. Have a great week.
Bye.
Russell, your hand is up if you still want to ask something. I'll